Hi everyone and welcome to my new video on the Find Children activity in UiPath. If it's hard to follow for you, then please watch my video on the basics of selectors in UiPath first. If you like the video, please also subscribe to the channel to be notified when I upload a new video. I hope you enjoy learning and happy automation. The Find Children activity in UiPath returns a collection of child UI elements for a defined search scope or parent element. So when we want to use it in UiPath, we're going to select Find Children activity. And for the sake of testing, I'm going to store the output in a variable called children collection. And I'm also going to add a for each loop, which is going to highlight all our identified elements. And give the element current item. Now for the first example, I have just opened a dummy CRM page, CRM web application. And for the first example, for the simple example, I'm just going to try and retrieve these 4 buttons here on top. If you think of use case, maybe you have a whatever, you have an item in a database or something that has a variable number of pages here, and then you can use the Find Children activity to retrieve the number of pages first and then loop through all these pages. I think this is in general one of the most common use cases to identify UI elements to then loop through them. So if we want to do that, we are going to click indicate on screen, and we then need to define our search scope, meaning our parent element. So if I want to retrieve these 4, I could, for example, use this this menu bar or whatever it is as my parent element. And I'm going to see that it's going to create a selector here and also a predefined filter. Now, if we are testing this, we're going to see that UiPath identifies the 4 buttons and highlights them one by one. Now, what's important here as well is that we can define the scope differently. And we just use the default option, which is Find Children, and Find Children is only going to identify immediate children. So meaning we're going one level down basically. And if we are using Find Descendants, and I think those 2 are the ones that we are using the most, because for the last 3, there's still no good documentation basically, but I'm going to try to explain one of them in the end as well. But if we are selecting Find Descendants here, it's going to identify the children and the children of the children. So basically all the UI elements under my parent element. So the difference when I select this option is when I run it, it's not only going to identify the buttons, but also the text, or in the first case, the button as well. And then we have more elements basically. So this was the first use case that I wanted to show you. For the second use case, because then we can also use the filter property, we're going to try and extract all these edit icons here. Because if you imagine a use case, there might be several entries in a database, and maybe only some of them can be clicked, because only some of them have this button, because there's something with a status or whatsoever. then what you could do is basically first identify all the buttons, and then loop through them one by one. Open the data set, edit it, save, click the next one. Okay, so if we want to do this, we first need to change our search scope. So as our parent element, we could, for example, select our table here. And now if we want to change the filter, we are actually going to use UI Explorer first, because we need to find an attribute that identifies the specific element that we are searching for. So I could use UI Explorer here and then maybe target the pencil button here. And now I can check if there's any attribute that I can use to identify it. So the first thing I see here is the class, because it sounds very unique actually. And we have the OXD icon pencil fill. So I assume that it's the class of all these pencils here. We can select another one and we can see it has the same class. So this will be my filter. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to add it here and move to the other screen in my filter expression. We're going to leave the webctrl because this is our node, and we're going to add the attribute class and our pencil fill class as the filter. So when we once again try and run it, we're going to see that UiPath does exactly what it should and identifies all the different icons and highlights them one by one. And in this case, as we're going by children element, it's also not important if they are visible. It's just visible for the highlight action, so that's why I'm scrolling, but it's going to identify all the children elements. Now I'm going to stop it. But in this case, it's very important that we select find descendants, because once again, if we are using UI Explorer, you can see that these pencils are not the immediate children of our table, but they are maybe within the table, then within the table row, and within the table row, they are basically in the last column, and then they are within this button. So we need to get several levels down, and therefore we need to select find descendants and not find children. For the second use case, I first need to say that this is a bit experimental because, as I mentioned before, there's no real documentation yet on the last three options, but I found one use case, so I'm just going to try and show it to you. But this also works for all of the three. So I'm just going to use top levels as an example. And as far as I understood, this retrieves the top level UI elements of a specified session, so to say, or basically of my entire session. So what I'm going to do here is remove my selector. And then for the filter, I'm going to change this and use window app here, because I just want to show you that this is the use case I found. I'm going to use here on the top level HTML app is MSH X. So if I change the filter here, I should now get all the top level UI elements that includes the filter HTML app exe basically. So what I should do here instead of highlight, because I think it doesn't make too much sense, is I could use the get attribute activity. I'm going to use my current item as element, and for the attribute I'm just going to use for the attribute I'm going to use the title. So let's see, title, and I'm going to log this to the logging here. So I'm going to save it to title, and we're going to log message with our title variable. So if I run this now, what's going to happen is that it gives me the 4 or 3, was it 3? It's going to give me the 1, 2, 3, 4 open windows in Edge here, because they all share the same filter, which is the HTML app. And these are actually the top level UI elements, the window elements. It's this window, this window, this window, and this window. And that's the only possibility I found to use this activity. And the actually weird thing is that if you change this to find process or find thread, I think you're going to get the same result.